Montana Territory, autumn of 1883. The wind was sharp enough to cut through wool and bone, and the sky had the color of hammered tin when the traveling cowboy rode into Birch River. His name was Jasper Tolen, and he came with dust on his boots, a rifle slung across his back, and no real destination, just a past he did not talk about and a future not worth planning. He had worked cattle down in Wyoming, chased outlaws in Dakota, and lost a brother in a mining collapse 2 winters back. Now he rode with a small traveling horse show, part work, part escape, helping break broncs and set up shows in towns too small to matter. He had not meant to stop in Birch River more than a day, but then he saw her. She stood near the edge of the mercantile porch, her face half shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. A scar ran from the corner of her left brow to just above her cheekbone, faint, healed, but there. Her coat was threadbare, too thin for the chill, and her boots were scuffed at the toes. She held the hand of a little boy, no older than 6, with the same dark eyes and quiet watchfulness. A girl, maybe 8, stood behind her, tugging at her skirts. "Zadie," the girl whispered. "That man's staring." "I know," the woman said softly, not looking away. Zadie Rourke had lived in Birch River since she was 16, though no one really knew where she'd come from. Folks said she was once pretty before the fire. Folks said she used to laugh before her husband ran off and left her with 2 babies and a burned-down farmhouse. Folks said a lot of things, and one of them was always the same. Zadie Rourke was too broken to love. Jasper dismounted slow, hat in hand, his gray eyes steady. "Ma'am," he offered, voice low. "You all right?" Zadie gave a small nod but said nothing. The boy clung tighter to her coat. The mercantile door swung open behind her and old Mr. Carver stepped out carrying a crate. "You need help getting that home, Zadie?" he asked. "I can manage," she replied quietly, turning to lift the box herself. The crate slipped. Jasper stepped forward fast, catching it before it hit the ground. "I said I can manage," Zadie snapped, eyes flashing. Jasper held up one hand, calm. "I do not doubt it, ma'am. Just not fond of wasting good apples." She hesitated, then sighed. "Fine." The walk to her small cabin on the edge of town was quiet. The children walked close to her, both of them wide-eyed but silent. Jasper carried the crate without effort, noting the sag in her roof, the broken fence, the way her hands trembled when she reached for the key. "Is it just the 3 of you out here?" he asked, setting the crate on her kitchen table. "Yes," Zadie said flatly. "And we do fine." He looked at the empty fireplace and the thin quilts folded on the cot. "No doubt, but winter's coming fast." "I know what season it is," he nodded once. "All right, you take care." Zadie opened the door without a word. Jasper stepped out, but something in him twisted as he walked away. Maybe it was the boy's hollow stare. Maybe it was the girl's bare feet on cold floorboards. Or maybe it was the woman's eyes, hard as flint, but full of something aching and quiet. The next morning he returned with chopped wood. She was in the field, mending a broken fence post with a hammer too small for the job. "I did not ask for charity," she said. "Good," Jasper replied, "because I do not give it." She looked at him, puzzled. "I trade firewood for pie. I do not bake." Then stew or silence. "I will take either." Zadie stared at him a long while, then nodded once. That night, he ate rabbit stew by her fire while the children watched from the cot. The boy, Felix, barely spoke, but the girl Franny asked dozens of questions about horses, prairie storms, and whether Jasper had ever shot a bear. "Just once," he said, eyes glinting. "And only because it tried stealing my beans." Franny laughed. Felix smiled faintly. Zadie did not laugh, but she listened. Over the next week, Jasper kept finding reasons to linger. He fixed the barn door's crooked hinge. He brought over canned peaches from the general store. He taught Franny how to throw a lasso with a piece of rope and showed Felix how to whittle a toy horse. Zadie watched it all with guarded eyes. "What do you want?" She finally asked him one evening after the kids had fallen asleep. Jasper leaned back in the chair, gaze steady on hers. "Nothing. No one does this kind of thing for nothing," he shrugged. "Maybe I just like being useful." You do not know me. I know you get up before dawn. I know you skipped supper twice last week so the kids could eat more. I know you walk with a limp when the cold sets in. You think that makes you broken?" Her lips tightened. "People talk. People lie." Zadie looked down at her hands. "My husband left when Felix was 4 months old, burned the barn down drunk. We barely got out alive. I lost everything. I was not always like this." "I believe you." She looked up sharply, surprised. "I have seen broken," Jasper said. "You are not it." The silence between them stretched deep, heavy as snowfall. Then Zadie whispered, "Why are you really here?" Jasper hesitated. Then, "Because I got tired of riding away from things." She looked at him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. The next morning, he was already splitting wood when she came out with coffee. No words, just handed him the tin cup and stood beside him, watching the sun rise over the frost-dusted field. He did not need more than that, but something changed after that. Zadie started letting him in more. She let him teach Felix to ride. Let him take Franny into town for candy. Let him fix the roof without protest. She even smiled once, just barely, when he told her about a time he got thrown off a mule in front of a crowd in Laramie. And when she stood close to him as he brushed down her old mare, their shoulders touching, she did not pull away. One night, long after the children were asleep, she asked, "What if you leave?" "Do you want me to?" She shook her head. "Then I will not." Zadie's eyes filled, but she blinked fast. Jasper reached out, slow, steady, and let his hand rest against hers on the table. Her fingers trembled, then closed around his. She whispered, "They called me too broken to love. They were wrong." She looked up, and he was already looking at her like she mattered, like nothing had been lost, not really. And for the first time in years, Zadie Rourke believed it. The first snow came quiet, soft as breath, blanketing the hills beyond Birch River in a layer of white that turned the world still. Smoke curled from chimneys. Ice crusted the edges of the creek, and Jasper stayed. He moved into the hayloft above Zadie's barn without asking. No one said it aloud, but the children began setting an extra plate at supper. Franny left a folded quilt at the bottom of the ladder. Jasper found it and used it without comment. Days shortened. Nights came early. Zadie canned squash and dried apples, while Jasper helped mend the lean-to that kept the cow from freezing. They worked alongside one another, never hurried, never idle, the kind of rhythm that comes when two people move through hardship without needing to name it. One evening, Zadie sat across from him at the table, wrapping Franny's old boots in flannel scraps. Jasper was running a whetstone over the blade of his skinning knife. The fire popped once, loud in the hush. "Felix had a coughing fit last winter," Zadie said. "There wasn't enough coal." "I thought I'd lose him." Jasper looked up, slow and sure. "You didn't." "I thought I would," she repeated, quieter. "He wouldn't wake up for near a day." Jasper set the knife aside. "What got you through?" She kept her eyes on her hands. "I didn't have a choice." That night he stepped out to the barn and returned with a wrapped bundle. He set it beside the stove without explanation. Zadie opened it the next morning, 3 sacks of coal. She said nothing, but when he came in from checking the traps, hot biscuits were waiting. The first time he touched her without gloves on, it was accidental, his fingers brushing hers as they reached for the same tin dish. Her skin was cold, but her hand startled like it hadn't been touched in years. He didn't pull back. Neither did she. The next day he asked, "What do you want come spring?" She was buttering bread. "Spring, you gonna stay here?" Her hands paused. "I've stayed this long." "That ain't what I asked." Zadie looked out the window. Snow was falling again, soft, steady. "I'm tired of scraping by," he nodded. "Then don't." She turned to him, wary. "What does that mean?" "I've been offered steady work near Livingston. A cattle outfit. Foreman's got more stock than he can manage come thaw. Says I can bring a family if I've got one." Zadie's breath caught. "I don't want to ride alone anymore," he said. "I can't just pack up and go," she said after a long silence. "The children, I know," he said, gentle, "but if you wanted it, I'd make it work, all of it." Zadie stood, walked to the stove, and stirred the beans even though they didn't need it. "You don't know what I am," she said stiffly. I've done things I'm not proud of, survived in ways I hope Franny never learns. Jasper didn't move. And still, you're the strongest person I've ever met. That doesn't mean I know how to want something better. He stood and crossed the room slow. Then I'll want it for both of us till you do. She turned toward him, something breaking loose in her face, fear maybe, or hope wearing the shape of it. You mean it? I wouldn't say it if I didn't. Zadie drew in a breath like she hadn't dared take one in years. I don't know how to trust it. You don't have to yet, he said. Just don't send me away. Outside, Franny's laughter rang out as she chased her brother through the drifts. Zadie looked toward the sound, then back at Jasper. I won't, she said, voice rough. I won't send you away. That night, Jasper didn't sleep in the barn. He stayed downstairs by the hearth with Zadie curled beside him under the quilt Franny had made from leftover scraps. He didn't touch her beyond the weight of his arm around her back. She didn't ask him to. They sat there, the fire burning low, and for the first time in years, Zadie didn't dream of running or burning or breaking. She dreamed of spring. Of land soft enough to plant in. Of a man who didn't leave. Of a life built slow and honest without shame or fear. She dreamed of love not as something lost, but as something coming home. By mid-January, the wind no longer howled, it moaned, low and constant, like something remembering sorrow. Birch River lay buried beneath snowdrifts taller than the fence posts, and the only sound most mornings was the creak of cold wood and the soft rustle of movement inside Zadie's cabin. Jasper rose before the others, stoked the stove, and fed the animals. He said little during those early hours, but left behind his quiet handiwork. Thawed water buckets, mended harness straps, a second pair of mittens for Franny made from an old wool shirt. One afternoon, as they sat at the table shelling beans, Felix pulled a book from beneath his cot. The pages were dog-eared and stained, the spine nearly split. You read? Jasper asked. Zadie looked up from her sewing. He's been teaching himself. There's not much to learn from, though. I had a school back near the Brazos, Jasper said, resting his forearms on the table. A traveling preacher taught me letters and numbers between branding seasons. Felix opened the book to a page where the words were scrawled in crooked pencil. Some of the letters are missing, he said. Jasper studied it. You keep this up, you'll be reading better than most ranch hands I've worked with. Zadie watched her son's face shift uncertain pride beneath the usual reserve. I've tried to keep them learning, she said, but I never got far myself. Doesn't mean you can't start now, Jasper said. If you want, she hesitated. I'm not sure I'd remember any of it. I'd teach you both, but only if you're not afraid of slow going. Zadie's needle paused. Slow's the only pace I've had in years. That night, she sat beside Felix while Jasper read aloud from a borrowed Bible, his voice low and even, pausing for each new word. Franny curled up on the cot with a blanket tucked around her, listening with half-closed eyes. Zadie didn't speak, but her lips moved quietly with the words. The next morning, she asked Jasper to bring back any spare paper from town. The day he returned, she was outside with an axe splitting kindling with her coat sleeves rolled up and her jaw set hard. He handed her the small wrapped bundle without a word. Inside were 3 folded sheets of paper and a stub of charcoal pencil. She didn't thank him, but she placed the bundle carefully beside the hearth that evening like something valuable. As weeks passed, the snow thickened. Jasper built a rabbit snare line near the shed and taught Felix how to check it. He showed Franny how to seal drafts with mud and straw. Zadie, watching from the kitchen door, finally asked, "Do you ever miss it?" He looked up from tying a loop with steady hands. "What's that?" "Riding." Not being tied to a place, not having to look after anyone. He rose slowly, brushing snow from his sleeves. "I miss things, sure, but not that." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I used to think I'd feel safest alone. I used to think I was meant to stay that way." Zadie didn't reply, but her gaze lingered long after she turned back inside. In early February, the cow gave birth to a calf too early. The storm had rolled in sudden, and by the time Jasper found them in the corner of the barn, the calf wasn't moving. He carried it inside, wrapped in burlap, and laid it near the stove. Zadie knelt beside it, her palms pressed to its flank. "Still breathing," she said. They stayed up through the night, feeding it warm milk by spoon, rubbing its legs to keep circulation. Jasper took the late watch, dozing between feedings, his shoulder propped against the wall. When dawn came, the calf stirred and raised its head. "Stubborn little thing," Zadie murmured. "Must have learned it from you," Jasper said without looking up. She didn't answer. She just reached over and touched his hand, not tentative, not uncertain, just steady. Come the last week of February, the days began to lengthen. The worst of the cold broke. One evening, Jasper brought in a bag of nails and a folded paper from Livingston. The offer still stood: a foreman's job, a small cabin, grazing rights for 2 horses and a milk cow. He laid it on the table and stepped back. "I'm not asking for an answer today or tomorrow. But I want you to know it's real." Zadie studied the paper. Her eyes didn't move over the words, she couldn't read them yet, but her fingers rested on the corner like she was weighing its worth. "What would it mean?" she asked. "A fresh start. Work enough for me, a schoolhouse not 5 miles off. You'd have a say in all of it." She looked at him then. "And if I said yes, what would we be?" Jasper met her gaze. "We'd be what we already are, just steadier." Zadie nodded, slow. "I need time." "You've got it." That night she stood at the doorway long after he'd gone to the barn. Snow fell again, light and whispering, and the sky above the trees had turned the color of pearl. Behind her, the children slept. The fire burned low. She touched the edge of the paper again, then let her hand fall. Outside, she could hear the soft thud of Jasper's boots in the hay, the quiet murmur he used to speak to the animals, the long, measured rhythm of a man who didn't rush. She closed the door gently behind her and began to write her first full sentence on the paper he'd brought. The words came slow, uneven, but true. And she didn't stop until the page was filled. By early March, the creek behind Zadie's cabin began to stir beneath its ice shell, water whispering in the cracks. The air still bit, but the wind had shifted, less like punishment, more like warning that change was coming. Jasper spent most mornings working a stretch of split rail fencing farther up the ridge, where the snow gave way to thawed earth. He'd started clearing a small plot beside the barn without being asked. He never called it a garden, and Zadie never asked what he meant to plant. But she brought him water and bread when the sun stood highest, and sometimes stayed to watch him dig. One afternoon, as Jasper worked the soil, Franny came running from the cabin, holding something wrapped in oilcloth. "Mama says you should have this." He wiped his hands and unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay a tin badge, dulled and bent at the edges. "Where'd she get this?" Franny shrugged. "Says it was Papa's, before things went bad." Jasper turned the badge over in his palm. "You keep it somewhere safe, all right?" Franny hesitated, then reached for it. "Mama said maybe you'd know what to do with it." He met her eyes. "Maybe I do." That evening, after supper, Zadie was mending a tear in Felix's coat when Jasper laid the badge on the table between them. "You knew what he used to be," she said, not looking up. "I figured, once I saw the way Felix watches doors like he's waiting for something he can't name." Zadie set down her needle. "He was deputy in Red Lodge, came home one night with blood on his shirt and a bottle in his hand and never stopped running after that." Jasper leaned back. "You think that's what'll catch up to you?" "I don't know what I think anymore." He was quiet a moment, then asked, "What did you want to be before any of it?" She folded her hands. "I used to draw things. Houses, mostly. I'd take a stick and scratch out porches and windows in the dirt when I was little. My father said I had no business dreaming about lumber I'd never afford." "You still draw?" "Not since the barn burned. My papers and pencils were in there." Didn't seem worth replacing. Jasper stood and crossed to the corner where his saddlebags hung. He returned with a packet bound in twine. "I picked these up in Livingston last time I went to ask about the job." He untied it. Inside were rolled blueprints, thick paper, a wrapped set of charcoal pencils, and a square of canvas. Zadie stared. "Why would you buy these?" "I figured if we're going to build something new, might help to know what it should look like." Her voice caught. You saying that for me or for you? For both. Zadie reached out slow and ran her fingers across the paper. I wouldn't know where to start. Then we start with the front door, Jasper said. You draw it how you want it to feel when you walk in. She looked up. And what if I draw something too big? Then we make it fit. The next morning, Zadie rose early. She didn't speak, just sat at the table and pulled the pencils close. Her hand trembled at first, but the lines came stiff, then sure. Felix watched from the cot, eyes wide. Franny crawled into Jasper's lap, resting her head against his chest like she'd always belonged there. By the second week of March, the calf was strong enough to wander the yard, and the children took turns feeding it from a bucket. Zadie finished her first full sketch, a square cabin with a porch that wrapped the front, 2 windows facing east. She didn't show it to Jasper right away, but he noticed her keeping it folded in her apron pocket. One evening, as Jasper scraped hides by lantern light, Zadie stepped outside, wrapped in her shawl. She stood beside him a long time, watching the knife move in clean strokes. You ever think about having a place that's yours? She asked. I used to think I wouldn't know what to do with it. And now, I figure it'd be like this, work that means something, quiet that don't ache. She nodded, then said, the cabin I drew, it's got 3 rooms, 1 for the kids, 1 for us, and a place in back to grow things. Jasper didn't move. You saying you'll come? I'm saying I want to build it with you. He looked at her then, like he was memorizing something he didn't want to forget. Zadie stepped closer, and this time she reached for him. Her hand fit around the back of his neck, her thumb brushing the scar near his collarbone. She kissed him slow, with nothing hidden. When she pulled back, her voice was steady. You never once made me feel like I owed you anything. You don't, he said, but I'll give you everything I've got anyway. Inside, the lantern flickered warm against the window pane. Snow still clung to the roof, but beneath it, the earth was waking. Zadie leaned into him, her forehead resting against his. Spring's coming, he smiled, the kind that didn't need words. And we'll be ready. By the time the thaw set in earnest, the road to Livingston had turned to deep ruts and puddled clay, but Jasper hitched the wagon without complaint. Zadie stood at the open door, arms crossed loosely over her chest, watching as he checked the harness and adjusted the traces. You sure you trust that bridge past Elk Hollow? She asked. I'll walk the horses through slow. If it holds, I'll come back with flour, kerosene, and that pane of glass you wanted. She nodded, eyes scanning the clouds. Won't hold past another storm. That's why I'm going now. He paused, then added, I'll only be 2 nights, 3 if the clerk's slow with the papers. Felix and Franny stood just behind her. Franny held the calf's lead rope, and Felix clutched a folded piece of paper, one of Zadie's drawings, the one with the sloped roof and smoke rising from the chimney. Jasper had tucked it into his coat pocket when he mounted the wagon. Zadie didn't say goodbye. She just stepped down the porch and pressed her hand to his arm, a touch that said more than parting words could carry. He rode out, not looking back until the trees bent behind him. The second morning after he left, Franny woke with a fever. Zadie kept her close, wrapped in quilts, and pressed damp cloths to her brow while Felix fetched wood and boiled water. By sundown, the girl's cheeks had flushed too red, and her breath came shallow. Zadie sat beside the cot, hands stroking the girl's hair. You're not going anywhere, you hear me? Felix stood near the door, pale and silent. Should I run for the doctor? No, Zadie said too quickly. Then, softer, he's 2 townships over. We'll get her through. She stayed awake through the night, coaxing broth past clenched teeth, whispering old lullabies she hadn't sung since before the barn burned. When Franny finally drifted into a deeper sleep, Zadie left the room only long enough to light the lantern in the window. Rain came at dawn. Not a storm, just a steady curtain that turned the yard to muck and hushed the birds. Zadie stood on the porch, the hem of her dress soaked, eyes on the road. She didn't expect to see him yet, but she looked anyway. Jasper arrived late that evening, his clothes wet through, the wagon bed half covered with canvas. He saw the lantern burning and didn't bother tying off the horses, just climbed down and crossed the yard. She's resting, Zadie said before he could ask. Fever broke this morning. She's weak, but she'll be all right. He let out a breath and stepped up close, his hands still cold when they found hers. I brought the glass, he said, and a sack of oats, some salt pork, and the deed papers. Signed, you made it back sooner than you should have. I didn't sleep. Zadie rested her forehead against his shoulder. You didn't have to come so fast. I did. He kissed her hair, rain soaking the back of his neck. I couldn't stay gone longer. Not from you. Inside, the fire burned low, and Felix sat half asleep by the hearth with the calf curled beside him. Franny stirred when Jasper stepped to her side, her small hand reaching toward his. You came back, she murmured. Course I did, he said, crouching beside her. You think I'd miss my own family? Zadie stood behind him, eyes soft with something new and steady. The next week, they began packing. Zadie gave the chickens to the widow down the road and bartered her spinning wheel for a new oil lantern. Jasper loaded the wagon with the care of a man who'd carried too many losses and wasn't willing to risk another. They left Birch River 4 days before the equinox. The road was rough, the wagon slow, but the sun stayed with them most of the way. They reached the edge of Livingston just as the grass began to green. The cabin was smaller than the one Zadie had drawn, but the land stretched wide, and the creek nearby ran clear. Jasper built the porch with his own hands, using her drawing as a guide. He gave her the front window she'd imagined, and when the glass pane fit into place, she stood back and smiled like it was something sacred. Felix and Franny started school 2 weeks later. Felix took to numbers first, and Franny made 2 friends in as many days. Jasper built a chicken pen beside the shed, and Zadie planted rows of beans and squash behind the cabin. One night, they sat on the new porch after the children had gone to bed. The sky above them stretched deep and endless, stars blinking into life one by one. Zadie leaned against him, her hand in his. You've done more than I ever thought I'd have. He turned toward her, quiet. You gave me a home. I just built walls around it. She looked at him then, not with hesitation or fear, but with the calm of someone who'd chosen and been chosen in return. I love you. I know, he said, smiling slow. I've felt it in every step. They married in June. No preacher, no crowd, just the 4 of them standing beside the creek, the water warm around their ankles. Franny picked wildflowers for Zadie's hair. Felix carried the ring Jasper had carved from bone. They didn't promise things they couldn't name. Just stood together, hands clasped, and nodded when they were ready. Years passed. The porch weathered under sun and storm. The children grew tall. Franny kept her love of stories and books, and Felix took to carpentry like he'd been born with it. Zadie filled notebooks with drawings of barns, kitchens, and rooms she'd never seen but imagined clearly. Jasper read every word she wrote along the margins. They never left Livingston. Never needed to, the land held them. The quiet taught them. And in the stillness between chores and seasons, between sunrises and snowfalls, they loved each other without question or end, not as a balm for what came before, but as something entirely new, rooted, real, and finally theirs.